The bioluminescent gardens of the Xavrian diplomatic compound shimmered under new Terra's twin moons, casting ethereal patterns across the carefully manicured alien flora. Nira Valdros adjusted her research scanner one final time, her heart racing not from the excitement of discovery, but from the anticipation of seeing him again. 3 months of joint xenobiological research had led to this moment of breakthrough that could revolutionize interspecies agriculture and a love that could destroy to civilizations. The protein synthesis patterns are extraordinary, she whispered into her recorder, though her attention was fixed on the figure approaching through the crystalline archway. Prince Keth Xavrian moved with the fluid grace characteristic of his people, his scaled skin catching the moonlight like polished emeralds. The traditional diplomatic robes couldn't hide the powerful physique beneath, nor the intelligence that burned in his golden, slit-pupiled eyes. "Dr. Valdros," he said formally, though his voice carried warmth that made her pulse quicken. "I trust your evening research is proving fruitful, more than you know," Nira replied, setting down her equipment. "The hybrid specimens we've created are showing unprecedented adaptive capabilities, but Keth," she used his personal name deliberately, a breach of protocol that sent shivers through both of them. "That's not why I asked you to meet me here." The prince's protective membranes flickered briefly over his eyes, a sign of deep emotion in his species. "Nira, we have discussed this. The implications. Have you told your mother about us?" The question hung in the perfumed air like a challenge. Keth's silence was answer enough. Empress Vela Xavrian ruled the most powerful reptilian empire in 3-star systems, and her views on species purity were well documented. The Xavrian Empire had spent centuries building their reputation as the galaxy's most genetically superior race, and interspecies relationships were not just forbidden, they were considered abominations. "My research partner has been asking questions," Nira continued, stepping closer. "Jackson Mills suspects something. He's noticed how much time we spend together, how I light up when your delegation arrives." She reached out, her fingertips barely grazing the cool scales on his wrist. "I can't keep pretending these feelings don't exist." Keth caught her hand in his larger one, the contrast stark, her soft human skin against his armored hide. "Do you understand what you're asking? My mother would disown me. Your government would recall you in disgrace. Both our peoples would see this as betrayal. And what do you see it as?" Nira challenged, moving closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Xavrians ran several degrees warmer than humans, and she'd grown addicted to that warmth during their late-night research sessions. "I see it as the most dangerous thing I've ever contemplated," he admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper, "and the only thing that makes me feel truly alive." Their first kiss was electric, literally. The bioelectrical differences between their species created a small shock that made them both gasp, then laugh softly against each other's lips. It was a perfect metaphor for their relationship, dangerous, unprecedented, and absolutely electrifying. They met in secret over the following weeks, their professional collaboration providing the perfect cover for stolen moments of intimacy. In Keth's private quarters, surrounded by the warm amber lighting his species preferred, Nira learned about Xavrian poetry and the complex harmonics of their musical traditions. In her laboratory, under the harsh white illumination humans favored, Keth discovered the passion that drove human scientific inquiry and the fierce protectiveness they showed for their discoveries. "My Uncle Thane would approve of you," Keth told her one evening as they lay together among the soft thermal bedding of his chamber. "He believes the Empire grows stagnant in its isolation, but he's always been considered the radical in our family." Nira traced the intricate pattern of scales along his shoulder, marveling at how they caught and reflected the ambient light. "Jackson asked me directly today if I was involved with you. I told him it was none of his business, but he's not going to let this go. He's always had feelings for me, and I think he sees you as a threat. Perhaps we should consider making our relationship public," Keth suggested, though his tone suggested he knew the impossibility of it. "Face the consequences together. Your mother would have you stripped of your title and exiled." Nira pointed out, "My government would court-martial me for compromising the research mission, and that's if we're lucky. If we're unlucky, This could spark an interspecies incident that destroys the peace treaty our peoples have worked decades to achieve. But fate, as it often does, made the decision for them. 3 days later, during what should have been a routine presentation of their research findings to both governments, Jackson Mills stood up during the question period and made an announcement that changed everything. "Before we celebrate this scientific breakthrough," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed amphitheater, "I think both delegations should know that Dr. Valdros has been conducting unauthorized personal experiments with Prince Keth, experiments of a most intimate nature." The silence that followed was deafening. Nira felt the blood drain from her face as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. On the Zavrian side of the amphitheater, Empress Vela's golden eyes narrowed to slits, her protective membranes flickering rapidly, a sign of rage in her species. "These accusations are," Nira began, but Keth's voice cut through her denial. "True," he said simply, rising from his position in the diplomatic section. "Dr. Valdros and I have formed a personal bond that transcends our professional collaboration. We have done nothing to compromise our research, and we refuse to apologize for finding love in the midst of scientific discovery." The amphitheater erupted in chaos. Human officials shouted about diplomatic protocols while Zavrian delegates hissed their disapproval. But through it all, Nira felt a surge of pride and love for the prince who had just sacrificed his future. To defend their relationship, Empress Vela stood slowly, her imposing figure commanding silence. "My son," she said, her voice carrying the deadly calm that preceded royal fury, "you have disgraced not only yourself but the entire Zavrian bloodline. You are hereby stripped of your title and banished from all imperial territories. As for the human," her gaze fixed on Nira with predatory intensity, "she will face the consequences of corrupting a prince of the realm." "Mother, no." Keth started forward, but imperial guards were already moving. "You made your choice," the Empress continued relentlessly. "Now face the results. Both of you will leave this system within 24 hours or face execution for crimes against the Empire," as security forces from both governments moved to escort them away. Nira caught Keth's eye across the chaos. In that moment of shared defiance and terror, she saw their future stretching ahead, uncertain, dangerous, but theirs to face together. The greatest love story in galactic history had just begun with exile and disgrace. But love, as Nira was about to discover, had a way of transforming even the darkest beginnings into something luminous. Their forbidden union would soon bear fruit that would shake the foundations of both civilizations. A child who would grow up to reshape the galaxy itself. The cargo hold of the starbound vagrant reeked of engine coolant and desperation. Nira pressed her back against the cold metal wall, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate the morning sickness that had become her constant companion. 3 months into their exile, and 3 months pregnant, she was learning that love stories rarely prepared you for the mundane realities of survival. The jump to Kepler Station should be smooth, Captain Rolf Brennan called down from the cockpit, his gravelly voice echoing through the ship's cramped interior. "But keep those magnetic restraints on. Last thing we need is your royal boyfriend floating around the cargo bay when we hit turbulence." Keth's jaw tightened at the casual disrespect, but he said nothing. Since their exile, he'd learned to swallow his pride along with a dozen other luxuries he'd once taken for granted. His scales had lost some of their lustrous sheen, dulled by stress and poor nutrition, but his devotion to Nira had only grown stronger. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling beside her on the improvised bedding they'd fashioned from cargo blankets. His larger frame curved protectively around her smaller one, sharing his natural body heat in the ship's perpetually cold hold. "Like I'm carrying the future of interspecies relations in my stomach." Nira replied with a weak smile. No pressure there. She placed a hand over her still flat abdomen, marveling at the life growing within. Their child would be the first documented human-Zavrian hybrid if they survived long enough for it to be born. The ship's communication system crackled to life, interrupting their quiet moment. "Attention all passengers and cargo." Brennan's voice carried a note of tension that made both Nira and Keth sit up straighter. "We've got company." Imperial patrol ship is requesting permission to board for a routine inspection. Keth was on his feet instantly, his protective instincts flaring. How routine can it be? There are no scheduled patrols in this sector. Routine enough that saying no would get us vaporized. Brennan shot back. Both of you, get in the smuggling compartment, now. The hidden space beneath the floor plates was barely large enough for one person, let alone two. Nira found herself pressed against Keth's chest in the suffocating darkness, listening to the sound of boots on metal as the Imperial boarding party conducted their search. Every footstep seemed to echo with the threat of discovery and death. Manifest shows you're carrying medical supplies to Kepler Station. An unfamiliar voice said above them. Lot of medicine for a research outpost. Outbreak of Regelian fever. Brennan replied smoothly. Nasty stuff. You boys might want to keep your helmets on. The conversation faded as the search party moved to other parts of the ship, but Nira and Keth remained frozen in their hiding place until Brennan gave the all-clear 20 minutes later. When they finally emerged, gasping for fresh air, both were shaking from more than just cramped muscles. That's the third patrol this month, Keth observed grimly. They're not giving up. Your mother's got a long memory and longer reach. Brennan agreed, helping Nira to her feet. But Kepler Station's different, neutral territory, no Imperial jurisdiction. You'll be safe there, at least until the baby comes. Kepler Station turned out to be a ramshackle collection of modules bolted together around an asteroid mining facility. It existed in the legal gray zone between empires, home to researchers, smugglers, and others who preferred to avoid official attention. The medical facility was run by Dr. Mira Chen, a human exile who'd fled Earth after publishing controversial papers on genetic enhancement. I've delivered hundreds of babies, Dr. Chen assured them as she ran her scanner over Nira's abdomen. But I'll admit, this is a first. The genetic compatibility between your species is remarkable. Almost like evolution intended for this to happen. Evolution or something else, Nira murmured, watching the fuzzy image on the scanner that showed their child developing normally. Despite the biological impossibility of its existence, Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. There's something you should know, words getting out about your situation. Not just in Imperial circles, there are human factions who see this pregnancy as either a miracle or an abomination. You're going to have enemies on both sides. The truth of her words became apparent within days. A message arrived through encrypted channels, bearing the seal of Elder Thane Gorvik, Keth's uncle and one of the few members of the Imperial family who had opposed Empress Vela's hardline policies. My nephew, the holographic image of the elderly Xavrian began, his weathered features creased with worry. I write to you in secret, for the walls have ears and my sister's rage burns undiminished. She has placed a bounty on both your heads alive, for she wishes to make an example of you before the Empire. But know that you are not without allies. There are those among our people who believe the old ways must change, who see hope in what you have created together. The message continued, with practical information, safe houses, trusted contacts, and resources that could help them survive their exile. But it was the final words that brought tears to both their eyes. The child you carry represents more than love between two individuals. It represents the future, a bridge between worlds that have been separated by fear and prejudice for too long. Protect that child, nephew. Raise it to be worthy of the sacrifice you have both made. As Nira's pregnancy progressed, their small quarters on Kepler Station became a haven of sorts. Keth proved surprisingly adept at human cooking, adapting recipes to accommodate both their dietary needs and their limited resources. Nira, meanwhile, documented everything about their developing child, creating a comprehensive record of the first human Xavrian pregnancy. Have you thought about names? Dr. Chen asked during one of their regular checkups, something that honors both our cultures. Nira replied, her hand resting on her now prominent belly. Something strong enough to carry the weight of what this child will represent. Dex, Keth suggested suddenly. It means bridge in ancient Xavrian, and it's close enough to human naming conventions to work in both societies. Nira smiled, feeling the baby kick as if responding to the suggestion. Dex Valdros Xavrian, our little bridge between worlds. The night their son was born, Two moons hung in Kepler Station's artificial sky, their light streaming through the medical bay's viewport as Nira labored to bring new life into an uncertain galaxy. Dr. Chen worked with quiet efficiency while Keth held Nira's hand, his own fear and wonder mirrored in her exhausted but determined face. When Dex finally arrived, his first cry echoing through the small medical facility, both parents wept at the sight of him. He was perfect, a seamless blend of both species, with his mother's expressive eyes and his father's natural grace. His skin bore the faintest hint of protective scaling along his spine and shoulders, while his limbs moved with the fluid strength characteristic of Xavrians. "He's beautiful," Dr. Chen whispered, placing the infant in Nira's arms. "And he's healthy. All indicators are normal. Better than normal, actually. This child is going to be remarkable." As they gazed at their son, both Nira and Keth felt the weight of prophecy settling around them. The small being represented hope and danger in equal measure, the promise of a future where love could transcend species barriers, and the threat of upheaval that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Captain Brennan appeared in the doorway, his gruff expression softened by genuine emotion. "Congratulations," he said quietly, "and I hate to interrupt, but we need to move. Imperial ships have been asking questions about this station. Won't be long before they connect the dots." Nira looked down at her newborn son, seeing in his tiny features the echo of both human determination and Xavrian strength. "Where do we go from here?" "Somewhere safe," Keth promised, though they all knew that safety was a relative concept for a family that existed in defiance of everything both their civilizations held sacred. "Somewhere we can raise him to be everything the galaxy needs him to become." As they prepared to leave Kepler Station under cover of darkness, none of them could have imagined that this child born in exile, raised in hiding, would one day stand before the combined fleets of two empires and forge a peace that had seemed impossible. Their exile was just beginning, but so was the legend of the bridge between worlds. 16 years had passed since that desperate flight from Kepler Station, and Dex Valdros Xavrian stood at the observation deck of the Terran Defense Academy, watching ships drift through the orbital traffic lanes above Earth. His reflection in the reinforced glass showed the unique heritage. He could never hide human features softened by the subtle scaling that traced his jawline and temples, eyes that shifted between brown and gold depending on the light, and the fluid grace that marked him as something extraordinary. "Still brooding about the combat trials?" Luna Stark's voice carried the easy familiarity of a friendship forged over years of shared outsider status. She joined him at the window, her vibrant red hair catching the artificial lighting of the corridor. As the daughter of disgraced diplomats, she understood what it meant to carry the sins of one's parents. "Just thinking," Dex replied, unconsciously touching the pendant at his throat, a small crystal that contained recordings from both his parents, messages they'd left for him before their deaths 3 years ago in a transport accident. "Tomorrow's results will determine whether I get assigned to the diplomatic corps or get shipped off to some research station where I can't embarrass anyone." Luna bumped his shoulder with hers, a gesture that would have sent most human teenagers sprawling, but barely moved Dex's Xavrian-enhanced frame. "Professor Blake wouldn't have recommended you for advanced placement if he didn't think you belonged here. Besides, you scored higher on the xenocultural competency tests than anyone in Academy history." "Because I am the test," Dex said with bitter humor. "Living proof that different species can coexist, or living proof that some things should never be attempted, depending on who you ask." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps and a voice that made Dex's jaw clench involuntarily. Well, the half-breed and his pet human having another philosophical discussion about belonging. Voss Krimmel emerged from the shadows of an alcove, flanked by his usual group of followers. The son of a prominent military family, Voss had made tormenting Dex his personal mission since they'd arrived at the academy. His prejudices ran deep, fed by years of listening to his father's stories about the genetic purity movements that had gained traction in certain human circles. "Not interested in your drama today, Voss," Luna said coolly, stepping slightly in front of Dex. She'd learned to read the subtle signs that preceded his rare losses of control. The way his pupils dilated and his breathing deepened as Xavrian fight-or-flight responses kicked in. "Oh, but I'm interested in yours," Voss continued, his voice taking on the mocking tone that had provoked a dozen fights over the years. "Did you know that? Admiral Cross is reviewing all the mixed heritage cases this semester. Rumor is they're going to start segregating the special students into separate programs. Wouldn't want the normals contaminated by association." Dex felt the familiar heat building in his chest, the dual nature of his heritage creating conflicting impulses. His human side wanted to argue, to reason with logic and evidence. His Xavrian side wanted to demonstrate exactly why his people had been feared warriors for millennia. It was Professor Orrin Blake's approach that had taught him to find balance between these impulses. "The only contamination here is the poison you spread with every word," Dex said quietly, his voice carrying just enough of the harmonic undertones characteristic of Xavrians to make several passing students stop and stare. "But I suppose that's what happens when fear masquerades as strength." Voss's face flushed red. "At least I know what I am. You're nothing but a lab experiment that got out of hand. Your parents died because they knew they'd created an abomination." The words hit like a physical blow, and Luna actually gasped at the cruelty of them. For a moment, the corridor fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. Then Dex smiled, and several students instinctively stepped back from the predatory expression that transformed his features. "My parents died saving a research station from a reactor meltdown," he said, his voice carrying the controlled calm that preceded violence. "They chose to sacrifice themselves rather than let 100 people die. What has your family sacrificed lately besides basic human decency?" Before Voss could respond, Professor Blake's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Crumble, I believe you have remedial xenobiology to attend. Mr. Valdros Xavrian, Miss Stark, my office." Now, the professor's office was a sanctuary of sorts, filled with artifacts from dozens of worlds and species. Blake himself was a tall, weathered man whose career had spanned first contact protocols with 7 different civilizations. He'd been one of the few faculty members to openly support Dex's admission to the academy. "That was well handled," Blake said without preamble as they settled into chairs across from his desk. "Though I suspect Mr. Crumble won't give up easily. His father has been lobbying the academy board to implement stricter admission standards." "Stricter standards meaning no hybrids," Dex said flatly. "Among other things." Blake's expression grew serious. "Which brings me to why I called you here. Admiral Cross wants to see you. Both of you, actually. There's been a development." Admiral Petra Cross commanded the Terran Defense Academy with the same efficiency she'd once brought to commanding battle fleets. Her office overlooked the academy's main training facilities, where cadets could be seen practicing everything from zero-gravity combat to diplomatic protocol. She stood with her back to them as they entered, her silver hair pulled back in the regulation military style. "Sit," she said without turning around. "And before you ask, no. This isn't about segregation protocols or Mr. Crumble's complaints about your presence here." Dex and Luna exchanged glances as they took seats, both wondering what could have prompted a meeting with the Academy's highest authority. "Tell me, Mr. Valdros Xavrian," Cross continued, finally turning to face them. "What do you know about current tensions between the Terran Federation and the Xavrian Empire?" "Only what's in the public feeds," Dex replied carefully. "Trade disputes, territorial disagreements over mining rights in the neutral zone, the usual diplomatic friction." Cross activated a holographic display that showed star charts with various fleet positions marked in red and blue. "The usual friction has escalated significantly in the past 6 months. 3 border incidents, 2 involving loss of life. Both sides are mobilizing for what could become the first interspecies war in 50 years. Luna leaned forward, studying the display. "What does this have to do with us, everything?" Cross said grimly. "Because you, Mr. Valdros Xavrian, may be the only person in the galaxy who can prevent it. There are factions on both sides who want this war, who see it as an opportunity to settle old scores and establish dominance. But there are also those who remember what peace can accomplish." She manipulated the display to show a different set of data communication intercepts. intelligence reports, and what appeared to be propaganda materials from both civilizations. Your existence has become something of a symbol, Cross continued. To some, you represent the possibility of cooperation between species. To others, you're evidence of corruption and weakness. The question is, which narrative wins? Dex felt the weight of destiny settling around him like a familiar cloak. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to be what your parents raised you to be, Cross replied. A bridge between worlds. There's going to be a diplomatic summit in 3 months, a last-chance effort to prevent war. Both sides have agreed to neutral arbitration, and they've requested a unique mediator, someone who understands both cultures intimately. They want me to mediate between the Terran Federation and the Zavrian Empire. Dex's voice cracked slightly with disbelief. They want the son of Nira, Valdros, and Prince Keth Zavrian, Cross corrected. The living symbol of what's possible when fear is overcome by love. Your parents' sacrifice gave you more than just life, young man. It gave you purpose. Luna reached over and squeezed Dex's hand. We'll do it, she said firmly, earning a surprised look from both Cross and Dex. If he's going to represent the future, he'll need someone who believes in that future standing beside him. Cross smiled for the first time since they'd entered her office. I was hoping you'd say that, Miss Stark. Diplomatic missions work better with teams, and your xenocultural analysis scores are nearly as impressive as his. As they left the Admiral's office, Dex felt the crystal pendant against his chest grow, warm as if his parents' messages were responding to the moment. He thought about their last transmission, recorded just before they'd flown into the reactor core to save those 200 lives. Our son will build the bridges we could only dream of. Walking beside Luna through the academy corridors, past students who stared with mixtures of curiosity and awe, Dex realized that his childhood of exile and struggle had been preparation for this moment. The boy who had never quite fit in anywhere was about to become the man who could help two civilizations find common ground. Are you ready for this? Luna asked as they reached their dormitory level. Dex looked at his reflection in the polished metal of the elevator doors. Human and Zavrian, neither and both, shaped by love and loss into something entirely new. I've been ready my whole life, he said. I just didn't know it yet. The galaxy was about to discover. 4 years later, Dex Valdros Zavrian stood in the shadow of the Galactic Mediation Center on Nexus Prime, adjusting the formal diplomatic robes that marked him as a certified interspecies mediator. At 20, he had already prevented 3 minor conflicts and earned a reputation as someone who could find common ground, where others saw only insurmountable differences. But nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover. The intelligence reports are disturbing, Captain, Neo Brass said quietly, handing Dex a secure data pad as they walked through the center's marble corridors. The grizzled military officer had become an unexpected ally over the years, his respect for Dex's parents overriding any prejudices about hybrid genetics. This isn't just escalating tension. Someone's actively working to ensure these peace talks fail. Dex scanned the encrypted files, his enhanced cognitive abilities a gift of his dual heritage, allowing him to process information faster than most humans. What he saw made his blood run cold. These attack patterns, they're too coordinated to be random border incidents. Someone's staging them. That's what we think, Neo confirmed. The question is who? Both sides are pointing fingers, but the real puppet masters are staying hidden. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Luna, now a certified diplomatic analyst and Dex's official partner in all mediation efforts. Her red hair was pulled back in the severe style favored by Terran diplomats, but her green eyes sparkled with the same warmth that had sustained their friendship through years of challenges. Have you seen the morning briefings? She asked without preamble, her voice tight with concern. Ambassador Talon Vex arrived early. He's been meeting with hardline delegates from both sides, and whatever he's telling them, it's not promoting peace. Dex felt his jaw clench involuntarily. Talon Vex had been a rising star in Zavrian politics when Dex's parents were exiled, and his hatred for genetic contamination had only intensified over the years. The fact that he was leading the Zavrian delegation to these crucial peace talks was a bad sign. What about the human side? Dex asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Senator Julia Reeves, Luna replied with distaste. She's been pushing for military action against the reptilian threat for months. Her presence here suggests the moderate factions on both sides are losing influence. As if summoned by their discussion, both figures appeared in the main corridor. Surrounded by their respective entourages, Ambassador Vex moved with the fluid grace characteristic of his species, his emerald scales polished to a mirror shine and his golden eyes scanning the crowd with predatory intensity. Senator Reeves, by contrast, projected the aggressive confidence of someone who had built her political career on fear and nationalism. Ah, the famous half-breed. Vex said loudly enough for others to hear as he approached. How fitting that the Federation would send an abomination to represent their interests. Ambassador Vex, Dex replied formally, keeping his voice steady despite the familiar spike of anger. I'm here as a neutral mediator, not as a Federation representative. Perhaps you'd benefit from reviewing the summit protocols. Vex's protective membranes flickered with amusement. Neutral. You're the living symbol of everything my people find disgusting. Your very existence is an affront to genetic purity. Senator Reeves stepped forward, her smile sharp as a blade. Now, Ambassador, let's not be hasty. Young Mr. Valdros Zavrian has his uses. After all, who better to expose the fundamental incompatibility between our species than someone who embodies that failure? The words were carefully chosen to wound, and Dex felt the familiar heat building in his chest. But years of training and Luna's steadying presence beside him helped him maintain control. I find it interesting, he said conversationally, that both of you seem to agree on something, despite representing opposing sides. Perhaps that common ground could be expanded in more constructive directions before either could respond. A new voice cut through the tension. Quite right, mediator. Unity of purpose is indeed valuable, though the current purpose seems somewhat destructive. The speaker was Zara Alex, a journalist whose investigative work had exposed corruption in 3 different governments. Her arrival at the summit had surprised everyone, as press access was strictly limited. She approached with the confident stride of someone who knew she held cards others wanted to see. Ms. Alex, Senator Reeves said with forced pleasantry, I wasn't aware independent journalists were invited to these proceedings. Oh, I wasn't invited. Zara replied cheerfully. I invited myself. You see, I've been tracking some very interesting financial transactions over the past year. Payments made to mercenary groups, bribes offered to border patrol commanders, and communications between certain political figures who should be natural enemies. The color drained from both Vex's and Reeves' faces, but they recovered quickly. Conspiracy theories and innuendo, Vex said dismissively. Typical of the sensationalist media. Is that what you call documented evidence? Zara pulled out a holographic projector and activated it, filling the corridor with images of financial records, encrypted communications, and surveillance footage, because I have quite a lot of it. The display showed a complex web of connections between extremist factions in both governments, arms dealers, and mercenary companies. At the center of it all were 2 figures whose collaboration should have been impossible. Talon Vex and Julia Reeves. You've been working together, Dex said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity, staging attacks, manipulating public opinion, ensuring that moderate voices are drowned out by calls for war. War is profitable, Luna added, studying the financial data, for weapons manufacturers, military contractors, and politicians who build careers on fear. You've both benefited from the escalating tensions. Vex's composure cracked first, his protective membranes flickering rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. You understand nothing. Abomination. Peace between our species is impossible. We are too different to fundamentally opposed. Better to settle this with honest warfare than live a lie. And you, Senator? Dex turned to Reeves, whose political smile had become a rictus of barely controlled rage. What's your excuse for betraying your own species' interests? Reeves laughed harshly. My interest is in human supremacy, not coexistence with creatures who should have been exterminated decades ago. If a little controlled conflict helps people understand that reality, so be it. The admission sent shockwaves through the gathered delegates. Conversations stopped, and security personnel began moving closer, sensing that the situation was about to escalate beyond mere political disagreement. "You're both under arrest," Captain Neo announced, stepping forward with a squad of Nexus Prime security forces for conspiracy, inciting violence, and violations of the Galactic Peace Accords. But Vex was already moving, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to draw a concealed weapon before anyone could react. "I won't be taken alive by mammals and their pet mutations," he snarled, the weapon's energy cell charging with an ominous whine. "Neither will I," Reeves declared, producing her own sidearm. Better to die fighting than submit to alien influence. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Dex found himself stepping forward, placing himself between the weapons and the crowd of innocent delegates behind him. His unique heritage gave him enhanced durability, but he wasn't bulletproof. It was Luna who moved first, tackling Reeves from the side and sending her shot wide. Neo's security team swarmed Vex, overwhelming him through numbers rather than skill. In the aftermath, as medical teams treated the wounded and security forces led the conspirators away, Dex sat heavily in one of the Carter's ornate chairs. The weight of what they'd discovered and what it meant for the peace process settled over him like a shroud. "It's not over," Luna said softly, taking the seat beside him. "Even with Vex and Reeves exposed, there are others who share their views. The extremist factions won't just disappear." "No," Dex agreed, fingering the crystal pendant that held his parents' final messages. "But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to prove that when extremists try to destroy everything good, there are people willing to stand in their way." Zara Alex approached, her journalist's pad already recording. "Mr. Valdros Zavrian, any comments on today's revelations?" Dex looked up at her, then at the crowd of delegates from dozens of species who had witnessed the confrontation. Some looked frightened, others angry, but many seemed hopeful, as if seeing conspiracy exposed had reminded them that cooperation was possible. "My parents died believing that love could overcome fear," he said finally. "Today, we proved that truth can overcome lies. Tomorrow, we'll prove that peace can overcome hatred. And the day after that, we'll build something better than either of our species has managed alone." As the sun set over Nexus Prime, casting long shadows through the Mediation Center's crystal windows, Dex realized that the real work was just beginning. The extremists had been exposed, but changing hearts and minds would take time, patience, and the kind of stubborn hope his parents had passed down to him. The storm was breaking, but beyond it lay the possibility of clear skies and new horizons. The bridge between worlds was finally ready to carry the weight of peace.